What if everything you knew about yourself was a lie? Emma Daniels, a simple waitress, thought she was just another face in the crowd, until one night, everything changed. A photo of a little girl, smiling innocently, stopped her dead in her tracks. The girl in the photo was her. How could her childhood picture end up in a billionaire's mansion? What secrets was the powerful Montgomery family hiding? Emma's search for answers will uncover a dark family secret, lead to a shocking reunion, and change everything she thought she knew about her past. Stay tuned, because this is a story you won't believe. You won't want to miss the twist at the end. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from right now. Let's jump into the story. Emma Daniels had worked at plenty of fancy events before, but nothing quite like this. The Montgomery estate in Charleston was something out of a storybook. With its tall white columns, grand marble driveway, and sprawling manicured gardens, it looked like something you would only see in a movie. Tonight, Emma was serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres at an exclusive gala, and though she was used to catering at fancy places, this night felt different. Just another shift, Emma whispered to herself as she adjusted her apron, trying to mask the nervous flutter in her stomach. At 23, Emma was no stranger to hard work. Raised by adoptive parents who always struggled to make ends meet, she had been working since she was 17, juggling 2 jobs just to get by. But tonight, serving at the gala hosted by the powerful Montgomery family felt like another world. She stepped into the grand estate, her tray balanced carefully in her hands. The mansion was full of the wealthy and powerful, politicians, CEOs, socialites, all dressed in their finest. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of light chatter. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting a warm glow over the marble floors while a string quartet played softly in the corner. Emma tried her best to focus on her task, offering drinks to the guests as they mingled. But something about this place felt off. It wasn't just the sheer opulence that surrounded her. There was a tension in the air, something she couldn't quite place. She had been to plenty of high-end galas before, but none of them had given her this sense of unease. It was as if the mansion itself was holding secrets, and the walls were waiting to spill them. As Emma made her way through the ballroom, offering glasses of champagne to the guests, she felt the weight of the house's history pressing down on her. The Montgomery family had lived here for generations. It wasn't just a mansion, it was a legacy, and that legacy felt like it had a life of its own. But it wasn't until Emma wandered off into a quiet hallway that things took a turn. She had been taught the rules: stay in the service areas, keep your head down, and do your job. But something called to her. A narrow corridor branched off from the main hall, dimly lit and tucked away from the bustling festivities. It looked forgotten, almost as if it had been left behind in time. Curiosity tugged at her, and despite every instinct telling her to stay in the ballroom, she stepped into the hallway. The hallway was lined with portraits, old, solemn paintings, of men and women who looked like they belonged to another century. Their eyes seemed to follow Emma as she walked, their painted gazes cold and unwelcoming. The air was thick with dust and old wood. She moved slowly, unsure of what she was looking for, but feeling an undeniable pull, and then, as she reached the middle of the hall, she saw it. A black and white photograph hung framed on the wall, slightly crooked as if it had been carelessly placed. It was a picture of a little girl, no older than 5. The girl was smiling, sweetly, her brown hair curling around her cheeks, her eyes wide and full of life. But what caught Emma off guard was not just the innocence of the photo. It was the unmistakable familiarity of the child in the picture. It was her. Emma's heart stopped. Her tray nearly slipped from her hands as she stared at the photo, her breath catching in her throat. The dress, the dimples, and the small scar above her eyebrow, all of it was there just as she remembered. It was her, as a little girl. But how? Why was her childhood photo hanging in a house she had never set foot in before? She stumbled backward, the weight of the discovery crashing over her. She tried to reason with herself. There must be some mistake. It could be a coincidence, just someone who looked like her. But deep down, Emma knew better. There was no mistaking it. That little girl in the photo was her. Panic set in. Her thoughts raced, and her hands shook as she clutched her tray tighter. How could her childhood photo be in this mansion? She had never been here, never even known the Montgomerys. Who put this photo here? And more importantly, why? A noise down the hall snapped Emma back to reality. Footsteps, faint but growing louder, brought her back to the present. She quickly turned and hurried back toward the ballroom, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to act normal, like nothing had happened, but the discovery weighed heavily on her. Her mind replayed the image over and over again. How could she ignore what she had just seen? How could she walk away without getting answers? As Emma resumed serving drinks in the ballroom, she tried to focus on the guests, but the weight of the discovery lingered. The guests' faces blurred as her mind raced. What did this photo mean? Who put it there? And why was it hidden away in a place so far from the rest of the house? Everything about the photo felt personal, like a secret that had been kept hidden for far too long. At that moment, Emma knew she couldn't just forget about it. She had to know the truth. But who could she ask? How could she uncover a mystery that felt so deeply tied to her own past without sounding insane? The night continued, but for Emma, everything had changed. The mansion, once just a place she worked, now felt like a puzzle she had to solve. And the photo, that one simple picture of a smiling little girl, was the key. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized that uncovering the truth would come with a heavy cost. The night wore on, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to be turned upside down. The photo was just the beginning, and she knew she had to find out why it was there, even if it meant risking everything. The next day, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her as she sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment. Her hands still trembled from the night before. How could she go back to the Montgomery mansion and pretend like everything was normal? The photo had left a mark on her, something she couldn't ignore. She needed answers. But where could she find them? Emma's thoughts kept drifting back to the photo, her own childhood face smiling up at her from the hallway wall of that massive estate. The more she thought about it, the more questions piled up. Why had no one ever mentioned her real family? Why was her photo in that house, and most importantly, who was behind the hidden truth? It wasn't like Emma to pry into other people's lives. She had grown up with a sense of keeping her head down, always trying to stay out of the spotlight. But something inside her had changed. She couldn't walk away from this now. She had to find out more. By the time evening came, Emma had made up her mind. She would return to the mansion. This time she would look deeper, no longer content with being just a bystander. She was ready to find out what the photo meant, and maybe, just maybe, it would lead her to the truth about her past. Back at the Montgomery estate, the night was much like the previous one, luxurious, bustling with the chatter of the elite. But for Emma, everything had shifted. As she walked through the back entrance, the cold air of the mansion seemed to greet her with an unsettling chill. She adjusted her apron and tried to calm her nerves, but her mind kept racing. This wasn't just another catering job anymore. Tonight, she had a mission. She picked up her tray and set off into the ballroom, offering champagne to the guests as she moved through the crowd. But instead of focusing on the usual chatter and laughter, her eyes scanned the mansion, looking for any sign that could give her a clue about the photo. She passed familiar faces nodding and smiling, but she was looking for something else. Something more. Finally, during a lull in the festivities, she found an opportunity. She slipped into the service hallway, the same hallway where she had seen the photo the night before. The air was quiet here, far removed from the glitz and glamour of the ballroom. This time, she was more determined. She walked the length of the hall slowly, her mind alert for anything unusual. Her eyes moved over the portraits of the Montgomery ancestors, their eyes seemingly watching her as she passed. But this time, she wasn't just looking at the pictures, she was looking for answers. As she reached the spot where the photo had been, she stopped in her tracks. The space on the wall was bare. The frame was gone, the photo missing as if it had never been there. For a moment, Emma stood frozen, unsure of what to think. Had she imagined it? No. She knew what she had seen. The photo was real. It had been there. And now it was gone. A surge of panic coursed through her. Someone had removed it, and that could only mean one thing. Someone knew she had seen it. Someone had been watching. Emma's heart raced as she turned on her heels and hurried back toward the ballroom, her footsteps echoing through the empty hall. The mansion no longer felt welcoming. It felt like a maze with hidden secrets lurking behind every door and every portrait. As she re-entered the bustling ballroom, she tried to regain her composure. She couldn't afford to act suspicious. But every part of her was screaming to get to the bottom of this mystery. Who had removed the photo? Why was it taken down so quickly after she had seen it? That night, Emma couldn't focus. Her mind was consumed by the missing photo, the strange disappearance that felt like it was part of something much larger. She had to know the truth, but she didn't know where to start. Who could she trust with such a secret? Who would believe her if she told them she had seen her own childhood photo in a stranger's mansion? It wasn't until later that night, when Emma was in the kitchen, that she found a chance to talk. She slipped quietly into a corner where Martha, the estate's cook, was chopping vegetables. Martha had worked at the Montgomery estate for decades, and Emma had always admired her calm, easygoing demeanor. Surely Martha knew something. "You've worked here a long time, right?" Emma asked, trying to sound casual. "Long enough to have more secrets than recipes," Martha chuckled, glancing at Emma. "Why do you ask?" Emma hesitated, but then decided to dive in. "The Montgomery family, have they always lived here?" Martha paused, her knife hovering over the cutting board. "Oh, honey, this estate's been in their bloodline for generations. Charles Montgomery inherited it after his brother and sister-in-law passed in an accident. Tragic story. They were in a car crash." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Charles Montgomery? The man who now owned the mansion and had everything? She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "Do you know what happened to his brother?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha's eyes darkened. "Yeah. People say it was just an accident, but who really knows?" "And did they have a daughter?" Emma's voice trembled as she asked the question that had been eating away at her since last night. Martha looked up at her then, her expression softening. "People say they did. A little girl. But she disappeared around the same time as the crash. Some say she died with them. Others say she was taken somewhere." It felt like the ground had been pulled from under her. Emma's head spun as the words settled into her mind. A little girl. A little girl who disappeared. Could she be that little girl? Could she be the daughter of James Montgomery? The weight of the realization hit her like a wave. If what Martha said was true, then she had a direct connection to the Montgomery family, a family who had erased her past. But there was more to uncover, and Emma was determined to find out what really happened. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. As she left the kitchen and returned to her duties, her mind was racing. Tomorrow she would return, and she would dig deeper. There was no turning back now. The night was just like any other at the Montgomery estate, grand, full of laughter, and rich with secrets. The chandeliers sparkled above, casting their warm glow on the marble floors. But for Emma, every inch of the mansion seemed to pulse with a hidden truth, a truth she was desperate to uncover. As she entered the mansion once again, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her, something that would change everything. The photo had been removed, and with it, her confidence had been shaken. Someone didn't want her to know the truth, and that realization made her more determined than ever to dig deeper. That evening, Emma moved through the mansion with a renewed sense of purpose. She worked efficiently, offering drinks and catering to the guests with a smile, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about what Martha had said, the story about the tragic accident, about a missing little girl. Her heart raced every time she thought about it. Was it possible? Could she really be the missing daughter of the Montgomery family? After another hour of circulating the ballroom, Emma saw her chance. Jill, the estate's longtime housekeeper, was standing alone in the hallway, adjusting a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Jill was known for being friendly, though she always seemed to have a quiet air about her, as if she knew more than she let on. Emma saw the opportunity to ask more questions. "Hey, Jill," Emma said casually, trying to sound natural. "You've worked here for a long time, right?" Jill smiled warmly. "Yep, over 20 years now. I've seen a lot come and go." "What's on your mind?" "Well, I've been wondering about the history of the house," Emma began, her voice low. "I heard a story about the Montgomery family, about the accident that happened years ago. Did you know anything about it?" Jill's smile faded slightly and she glanced down the hallway as if ensuring no one could overhear. "Oh, that's old news, child," she said quietly. "It's a sad story. Charles's brother Andrew was killed in that car crash along with his wife Helena. It was a terrible thing, but people around here don't talk about it much. Charles never wanted anyone to dig into his family's past." "But they had a daughter, right?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "A little girl?" Jill hesitated, her hands faltering as she placed the tray down on a nearby table. "That's what they say. The girl disappeared after the crash. No one really knows what happened to her. Some think she died with them, but there are rumors. Some people think Charles had something to do with it." "What kind of rumors?" Emma pressed, leaning in slightly. Jill glanced over her shoulder, her face serious. "People say Charles didn't want anyone to know about the girl. Maybe she didn't die like they said. Maybe she was taken away, hidden. Charles was young back then, but after the crash he took over the estate so quickly. The family didn't seem to care about anything except moving on." "You mean they just erased her?" Emma's voice trembled. "Some think that's exactly what happened," Jill replied, her voice heavy. "It's strange, though. I've worked here for years and no one ever talks about the girl anymore. Charles made sure of that. But there's something about the way he controls everything, you know? Nothing's ever been the same since that accident." Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, Jill stood up straight and quickly added, "You should be careful, Emma. There are some things in this house that people just don't ask about. Charles doesn't like questions. Trust me." With that, Jill turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing alone in the hallway, her mind spinning. What had she just heard? Charles had erased the truth. He had erased a life. But why? Why would anyone do such a thing? As Emma returned to the ballroom, her thoughts were consumed by the conversation with Jill. Her adoptive parents had always told her that she had been found in a shelter, abandoned and alone. But now, everything was in question. If Charles Montgomery really had something to do with her past, then who was she? What had happened to the girl who disappeared all those years ago? She needed more answers, and she needed them fast. Later that night, Emma slipped into the kitchen for a brief break. Martha, the cook, was busy at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. Emma hesitated before approaching her. This was her chance to ask about the accident, about the girl, and about Charles. "Martha," Emma said softly, her voice steady but uncertain, "do you remember anything about the girl who disappeared? The one who was supposedly with Andrew and Helena?" Martha paused, her back stiffening slightly as she turned toward Emma. "You don't need to be asking questions about that," she said, her tone firm but gentle. "People around here don't like it when you start digging into the past." "But what happened to her?" Emma asked, her eyes pleading for answers. "Why does no one talk about it?" Martha sighed, wiping her hands on a towel. "Because Charles doesn't want anyone to. After the crash, he became obsessed with protecting the family's name. He made sure everything was cleaned up, every loose end tied. People say the girl died with them, but there are rumors. Some say she was taken away. Others say Charles had something to do with it." "But why? Why would he hide her away?" Emma pressed, her voice almost desperate. "Because he wanted the family fortune," Martha whispered. "He wanted everything and he didn't want anyone to stand in his way. After the crash, he made sure no one asked questions. He erased her from the family's history as if she never existed." "So you think she might still be alive?" Emma's heart was racing. Martha looked at her with deep, knowing eyes. "It's possible, but no one will ever know the truth. Charles made sure of that. The words echoed in Emma's mind as she walked back toward the ballroom, her legs feeling heavy with the weight of what she had just learned. Charles had erased a life. Her life. But what could she do? What was her next move? She knew she couldn't let it go. She couldn't let the truth be buried forever. As she walked through the grand hall past the laughter and the clinking glasses, Emma made a silent vow to herself. She would find the truth, no matter what it took. The days that followed felt like a blur to Emma. She couldn't stop thinking about the things Martha and Jill had said. Everything she thought she knew about her life had been turned upside down. If the rumors were true, then she wasn't just a waitress at a fancy gala. She wasn't just an orphaned child adopted by a family struggling to make ends meet. She was someone else entirely. She was the daughter of Andrew and Helena Montgomery, a girl who had vanished, erased from history, by Charles Montgomery. The more she thought about it, the more determined she became to uncover the truth. But it wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about understanding who she really was. This was about justice. The family that had stolen her past had also stolen something from her. A piece of herself. And Charles, the man who had orchestrated this cruel cover-up, needed to pay. By the time the next event rolled around at the Montgomery estate, Emma was ready. She had no idea how far she was willing to go, but she knew she couldn't stop now. With each passing moment, the mansion became less of a place of luxury and more of a prison. A place filled with buried secrets, lies, and lost lives. And one of those lives she realized was hers. This time, as Emma entered the grand halls, she wasn't just a server. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a woman on a mission, and she would not rest until she had answers. She moved through the estate like a shadow, quiet, unnoticed. She offered drinks and hors d'oeuvres, her eyes scanning every corner of the mansion, looking for any clue, any sign that could bring her closer to the truth. But tonight, she wasn't just going to ask questions. She was going to take matters into her own hands. Around midnight, when the ballroom was buzzing with laughter and conversation, Emma saw her opportunity. She slipped away from the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the mansion like the back of her hand now. She had passed the old study dozens of times, and tonight, she would finally set foot inside it. Charles's private study, where all the family secrets were hidden, where the past had been buried under layers of deception. She crept through the darkened halls, past the staff rooms, and up the grand staircase that led to the third floor. The mansion seemed silent now, the heavy air pressing down on her. She could feel the weight of every step as she moved closer to the room that held the answers. Her hand trembled as she touched the doorknob of Charles's study. It was now or never. Inside, the room was exactly as she imagined. Old, dark wood. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. A massive desk sat in the center of the room, covered in papers and ledgers, but Emma's eyes were drawn to the far corner. There, hidden behind a large painting, was a safe. She didn't know how she knew it was there, but she did. This was where Charles kept the family's most precious secrets. Her heart pounded as she approached the safe, her fingers slick with sweat. She knew this was dangerous. If Charles caught her here, it would all be over. But the thought of walking away, without knowing the truth, was worse than any punishment she could imagine. She had come this far. She had to finish what she started. The safe was old, its surface scratched and worn from years of use. Emma reached for the numbers she had memorized in her mind. The date of the accident, the one that had torn her life, a part 0409-2005. The date her parents had died, the date she had vanished from the world, erased by Charles. She typed in the numbers, and the safe clicked open. Inside, the contents were just as she expected: documents, ledgers, and several flash drives. But it was the envelope that caught her eye. It was old, the edges slightly frayed, and it was addressed in delicate handwriting. To my daughter, Ray. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the truth she had been searching for. She grabbed the envelope with trembling hands, her fingers barely able to hold it steady as she carefully tore it open. Inside was a letter written by her mother, Helena Montgomery. The letter read, "My sweet Ray, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. Your father and I knew we were in danger, and we tried everything to protect you. If anything happens to us, promise me you'll grow up safe. Charles, your uncle, is not who he pretends to be. He wants the inheritance, the control, the name. Don't trust him, but never forget who you are. Ray Evelyn Montgomery, you are our daughter, our everything. Love, Mom." Tears filled Emma's eyes as she read the letter. The words were so simple, so full of love, yet so painful. Everything she had ever known was a lie. Charles had not only erased her identity, but had also hidden her mother away, keeping her in the shadows for years. Before she could process everything, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Charles was back. Emma quickly shoved the letter into her bag, grabbed the documents and flash drives, and slammed the safe shut. Just as she turned to leave, the door creaked open. Charles stood there, his cold eyes locking onto hers. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her, the tension thick in the air. "Well," he said slowly, his voice like steel. "I was wondering when you'd come looking for answers." Emma stood tall despite the shaking in her legs. "I know everything, Charles. I know what you did to my parents. I know who I am." Charles laughed bitterly, stepping into the room. "You think anyone will believe a girl from a shelter over me? You were a mistake, Ray. Just like your father. Too soft to lead this family." But Emma wasn't intimidated anymore. "I have proof," she snapped. "Documents, letters, the truth. And I'm going to the press with it." Charles's expression darkened, his face contorting with rage. "You're not walking out of here with anything," he growled. Without thinking, Emma bolted. She ran as fast as she could, her heart hammering in her chest. She could hear Charles shouting, but she didn't stop. She was so close now. The back door was just ahead. She reached it, and with a burst of energy, she pushed it open and sprinted to her car. The tires screeched as she pulled out of the driveway, her mind racing with the weight of what she had just uncovered. The next day, Emma met with a journalist who had been investigating the Montgomery family for years. She handed over the documents, the letter, and everything that would expose Charles for who he really was. Within hours, headlines exploded. "Scandal at the Montgomery estate. CEO under investigation for inheritance fraud and conspiracy," flooded every news outlet. Charles's empire began to crumble. But that wasn't the end of the story. A week later, a breaking news segment showed a woman being escorted out of a psychiatric clinic just outside Nashville. It was her mother, Helena Montgomery. The woman who had been locked away, forgotten, for so long, was finally free. Emma raced to the clinic, her heart pounding as she entered the room, and there, sitting by the window, was her mother. Emma whispered her name. "Mom?" The woman turned, her eyes widening in shock. "Ray?" she gasped. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she rushed to her mother's side. They embraced. Two lost souls finally reunited after years of separation. The doctors explained that her mother had suffered from amnesia after the crash, her memory erased by trauma. Charles had hidden her away, pretending she was dead so he could take everything. But now, with Charles exposed, Emma and her mother could finally live the life they were meant to have. They moved to a small town in Vermont where they opened a community center for orphans and displaced children. It was their way of giving back, of providing the love and safety that Emma had always wanted. As Emma watched the sunrise with her mother by her side, she whispered, "I'm finally free." And this time she meant it.